welcome to our June 2025 forms updates. Car Forms updates their library twice a year, generally speaking, once in June in the middle of our summer and once in December right near the holidays because they like to mess with us just a little bit. I apologize for not getting to this forms update sooner. Here we are on July 10th. These forms all came out on the 25th of June. So I apologize. For some reason, I was behind a month. I thought, this month was June and last month was June 1. I don't know. Anyways, here is our car forms update. Now, keep in mind, there are a lot of updated forms, new forms that are released. I generally only cover the forms that are pertinent to you and your business in real estate. So I don't cover, and I'll say residential real estate. I don't cover the commercial forms. I also don't cover, for the most part, the tenant forms. Also, there's a lot of forms that just got like a place for like a signature confirmation for receipt. I'm not going to go over those either. So you'll see some of those forms now have that on there. So we're going to jump in on the addendum. They updated our regular addendum. So remember, our addendum is for clarification, whereas our amendment is for changes to an existing agreement. So if we wanted to amend an offer, okay, or make changes to an offer or clarify something in an offer, that's where we would use our addendum. And there's now two addendums. So this one here is the regular addendum, CAR 4ADM. And they added housing provider instead of landlord because we want to be politically correct. So just note they updated that terminology in here. They went through and updated that terminology on most of the other forms about a year ago. There's just some forms that remained with landlord on them. So this is going to be, hey, this is an addendum between buyer or tenant and seller housing provider. And then notice here it says the term housing provider also includes landlord or rental property owner. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And then they added some form notes to it just so you make sure we're using the right form. This form is intended to be used in buyer-seller transactions or tenant housing provider transactions. So between your client, your buyers and the sellers, or your sellers and the buyer, okay? Not between you and them. For all other situations requiring an addendum, we're going to use the new form, which is addendum generic, CAR form ADM-GEN. Okay, a change or addition to a previously provided seller property questionnaire, real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS, or other disclosure may be made on an amendment prior to disclosure. That's another form that they're putting out. We'll go over today, and may give it to the buyer. It may give the buyer a right to rescind. To change the terms of an already executed agreement, use the amendment to the existing agreement, or the CAR form AEA. So those are the changes you're going to see on the addendum. It just clarifies before, if we made changes between on a TDS or SPQ, something got left out that needed to be included, we would just do an addendum to that. So now we're going to use a specific form for this. So this is really just clarification. So almost right now, the main way that I use an addendum is I'm writing an offer. I might have like a contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. That form doesn't go into much detail on our plan to get their form changed. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll do an addendum to the offer, and I'll clarify what's going on with the buyer's property. Is it already listed? What are we going to list it as? How are we going to market it? How soon do we expect it to go under contract? What do we think the market value is? What's the listing price, right? So I do that on an addendum. The other place that I do this is sometimes you might submit an offer, and then you want to make changes to that offer before it gets accepted. Maybe there's another offer that came in, so you want to raise your offer price. You could rewrite the whole offer, or you could just do an addendum to the offer and change those terms, okay? So that is your form ADM, changes to that form. The next form that we have is our addendum generic, okay? And again, this one's got a number at the top, and this one is between, it's for the residential listing agreement or the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement for the most part. Okay, that's where you're going to use this, is we're wanting to clarify some items there. So maybe you have a graduated compensation schedule. You could do it on this addendum generic and do it as an addendum to the buyer representation agreement. Maybe you've got a graduated commission schedule on the listing agreement. Maybe you want to clarify some items that are or aren't included on that listing agreement at time that you're filling it out. This would be the form that you're going to use for this. This form is going to be between you and the principal, or the brokerage and the principal for the most part. Okay, so that's how this form gets used. So I just wanted to introduce this one because it is a new form. And then again, you've got principals signing down here so that they understand and that they've received a copy of this. Okay, now notice up here, the broker, agent, buyer, tenant, that's principal one. We're going to put the names in there. So it might be like Realty One Group Fox. And then down here might be your buyer's names. Okay, so principal one, principal two. So when you see that down on the bottom, don't let it fool you. Now, again, this addendum is just really for clarification to provide further information. If we're making changes to a listing agreement or a buyer representation agreement, we want to make sure to use either the modification of terms for the listing agreement, which is MT-LA, or the modification of terms for the buyer representation agreement, which is the MT-BR. Okay, so there is your addendum general. So again, that's a new form. All right, now let's jump in. We've got our, we're going to hold on just a second. I'm going to pull up a different one. I think I can do that right here. We're going to go to our AFA. That's our assumed financing addendum. This one's one that is revised. We would use this anytime we're writing an offer where the buyer's going to assume the seller's financing. This makes that assumption officially a contingency of the contract. Yay, right? So this agreement is contingent upon buyer obtaining the assumption below. It goes through the buyers. This isn't a new form, right? But any difference between the estimated and the actual loan balances shall be adjusted at close of escrow. Okay. Seller is advised to carefully investigate the substitution of eligibility along with proper documentation to determine whether seller will be able to obtain another VA loan prior to this assumed loan being fully paid off, right? So that's if it's a VA loan, they're just adding that advisory in there for sellers so that they make sure they know what they're doing. Okay, and then they renumbered it to 1, 2, 3, and then we have 4. Okay, and then A or B. Okay, the default here, obviously 17 days is what the buyer has to remove this contingency or cancel the agreement. However, if the loan documents aren't provided to buyer within 7 days after acceptance, buyer has 5 days after receipt of these documents or the time specified in the first sentence to remove this contingency or cancel the agreement. Now, keep in mind here that we could check this box here for B. So that's A, right? That this agreement, this contingency needs to be removed. 4B is the one that I would probably check that, hey, this assumed loan contingency shall remain in effect until the assumption is approved. Okay, till that is approved. Okay, so that's this form. Anytime we're doing assumption of a loan amount on a purchase, we're going to use the assumed financing addendum. All right. Our next form is, we're just going to keep bouncing around here, our APD form. This is a new form. This is an amendment prior to disclosure, sorry, not prior to disclosure, but to prior disclosure. So this is the new form that we're going to use if the sellers filled out our TDS and our SPQ. And now something else, they're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that there was an insurance claim on the property and I didn't mention it. Or I totally forgot that we painted the property and I didn't put it on that SPQ. Or I didn't even know this, but the neighbor came up to me and told me that before we even bought it, there was a gruesome murder on the property. Who knows, right? Whatever that might be. This is the form that we would use to make changes to our SPQ or our TDS. Okay, and you would mark that, hey, we're amending or adding to a previously provided seller property questionnaire or transfer disclosure statement. You're going to check the box. There's also an other. So if there was a exempt seller disclosure or some other property disclosure here that we wanted to amend or add to, we're going to fill that in there, put the date on. You're going to put the property address there. between the buyer and the seller. If it's a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, you would check this box here, the next box down. And then if the APD, which is the amendment to prior disclosure, is for all units, we would just leave it not checked. If it's specific to one of the units, we would check the box there. Remember, once we get over 4 units, we're now into commercial property. It's not required for that TDS and SPQ. It's only for residential properties. Now, keep in mind here, it's got our disclosure limitation. The following are representations made by the seller and are not the representations of the agent, if any. This disclosure statement is not a warranty of any kind by the seller or any agent, and not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principals may wish to obtain. The disclosure is not intended to be part of the contract between the buyer and seller, unless otherwise specified in writing. Broker and any real estate licensee or other person working with or through broker have not verified the information provided by the seller. A real estate broker is qualified to advise on real estate transactions. If seller or buyer desire legal advice, they should consult a qualified California real estate attorney. Here's the seller's going to make the following disclosures, and they can apply it to a specific paragraph of the designated form. So if it was like SPQ section 2A, we could put that in there. If it's not necessarily a amendment or addendum to one of the forms, it's just additional disclosure that we forgot to include, you don't necessarily have to fill something out there. For the most part, anything the seller's going to disclose is going to relate back to either that TDS or that SPQ. So keep that in mind. Just figure out where it fits in and fill in that paragraph number. Now, keep in mind down here, seller represents that the disclosure is made on this form and any attached addendum is true and correct to the best of seller's knowledge as of the date signed by seller, right? Things might change after that signature date. Seller acknowledges that seller's obligation to disclose is independent from any duty of disclosure that a real estate licensee may have in this transaction. Nothing that any such real estate licensee does or says to buyer or seller relieves seller from his or her own duty of disclosure, and an amendment to the seller property questionnaire or the transfer disclosure statement. Hold on. Oh, good. It rolled over to me. May give the buyer a statutory or contractual right to rescind or cancel the contract. Okay, so remember, anytime new material information is provided to our buyers, the buyers have, for the most part, 5 days to review that information. Assume that it's given to us electronically. If it's handed to us in person, it's a little different, but most of the time it's electronic. Okay, they have 5 days to review that information and decide whether they want to move forward or not, even if they've removed their contingencies. Okay, we could have removed all of our contingencies and then the seller discloses new information. The buyer has the opportunity to review that new information. Now, where does that not fall into play? If we remove all of our contingencies up front before we've actually received the TDS or the SPQ, that makes it so that our buyers no longer have that ability to cancel once they receive those forms. So just kind of keep that in mind. But anytime we have this additional disclosure, that gives us our ability back for the most part. Okay, so that is our new form, our APD, amendment to prior disclosure. We're going to use that anytime there's changes to the SPQ or TDS. We don't make changes to that SPQ or TDS once it's done and signed. Okay, the other thing that we don't do is we don't advise our sellers on how to fill out that form. You can refer them back to that disclosure information advisory form. So that's your amendment to prior disclosure. Our next form that we're going to cover is our BCA form, which is our broker compensation advisory. This is one that is already in place. They've just made a small update to it. Down here, requirement for written agreements, it says pursuant to a January 1st, 2025 new law in California, all licensees must have a buyer representation agreement as soon as practical upon acting as the buyer's agent, and it must include the amount of compensation, services to be rendered, when compensation is due, and contract termination, which may not exceed 3 months. So they just added that into this form. The other thing that they added in, so they're just providing clarity there, is down here on 3B, pursuant to the NAR settlement, see paragraph 2B, a buyer's broker is not permitted to receive compensation for services from whatever source that is greater than the amount in the buyer representation agreement. So if anybody has been around long enough, the original buyer representation agreement before the settlement said that, hey, we're going to put in, X percent. And if we happen to get Y percent, which is more than X, how do we want that? Does it go to the buyer? Does it go to the agent? Does it get split 50-50, right? We could specify that in the agreement for the amount over. In our new one, that is the max compensation that you can receive from the transaction. So what I would recommend is putting in the max compensation on that BRBC that you think your services are worth, that your value is, and then you can always adjust it down depending on what the buyer is able to cover or what the seller is willing to pay. So you can always adjust it down with that modification of terms, that MT-BR form. So just kind of keep that in mind there, but it just provided clarity on this form that already existed. So super simple change there to the BCA. All right, we're just rolling right along here. The next one, we have our BCO, our buyer counter offer. Now, keep in mind, they just made a couple small changes to this, and this one is a draft, so they didn't update the date yet. It's probably updated in the CAR forms. I like the draft ones because it gives us the changes in red, which makes it really easy to review. Let's see here. Unless otherwise agreed or altered in another counter offer, if in the original offer, the appraisal contingency amount is lower than the offered price, for example, the optional box is checked in the third column, paragraph 3L2 of the RPA, right? So it just lets us know, and that's that appraisal gap line. So if at any point we fill in that the buyer's willing to pay more than the appraised value, okay, that it's going to adjust accordingly. It doesn't stay the same. So if we offer $1 million, okay, and we say that, hey, we're willing to move forward as long as it appraises for 950,000, that gap is 50,000. If they counter at 1.2 million, now that gap gets adjusted to 1.15. It doesn't stay at 950,000. So that's just clarifying this. Okay. And it's also saying that, hey, if it doesn't do that, then buyer may exercise the buyer's appraisal contingency. Okay. So super simple there as far as the buyer counter offer. The only other thing is that they added and delivering a copy down here for late acceptance. That seller's acceptance is only if it's a late acceptance, right? We gave an expiration date on this counter offer. The seller didn't accept the buyer counter offer in the time specified. They sign it and return it back. That it's only binding if buyer agrees to the late acceptance by signing below and delivering a copy before 5 p.m. on the third day after the date this buyer counter offer is signed in paragraph 4. Okay, so that's all that's there. Buyer counter offer. If anytime somebody has questions as I'm going through this, feel free to unmute yourself and just stop me or throw them in the chat box. I'm paying attention to both. Our next form is our BEO. That's our buyer early occupancy addendum. Okay, so this is for buyer pre-closing possession of 29 or fewer days. Now, in the past, there was no clarification on whether it should be like a lease agreement or buyer early occupancy addendum. For the most part, our buyers don't occupy properties ahead of time. It's dangerous. I don't recommend it, but in certain circumstances, it might be warranted. For a pre-closing occupancy of 30 days or more, we're going to use the interim occupancy agreement. So now we have the buyer early occupancy agreement and the IOA form. Okay. And then it added a note here that just says local rent control or other laws regarding tenants' rights may impact the buyer and seller's rights and obligations. It tells us when the term is going to begin. That's when they can begin occupying the property. And then it's blank days before close of escrow or on a specific date. They added close of escrow in there. They also added subsequent agreement or written agreement there. Consideration is they also updated those section 1 changes were pretty simple. Buyer agrees to pay seller an early possession fee for the term specified in paragraph 1 of blank per day or X. That would be like a flat rate. This fee shall not be applied to the purchase price, right? This is saying, hey, it's not applied to the purchase price. This is going directly to the seller for letting you move in early. Buyer shall pay this fee immediately upon entering into this BEO by directly paying the seller, not the escrow holder, via cashier's check, wire payment, or other. Buyer shall have no right to possess under this BEO until seller has received the early possession fee and all monies have cleared the seller's account. So if we use like a regular check, it's got to clear that seller's account, which is why it says cashier's check or wire electronic payment. If during the BEO term specified in paragraph 1, the parties mutually agree to extend escrow, buyer shall pay seller additional consideration for the extended early occupancy period in the amount of blank per day. Okay, so it's just saying, hey, if escrow gets extended longer, buyer's obligated to pay more funds. Okay, if checked, buyer agrees to increase buyer's deposit by blank and immediately deposit such fund with escrow holder upon execution of this BEO. At close of escrow, the increased deposit will be applied towards the purchase price or buyer's pre-occupancy utility expense pursuant to paragraph 3 or blank. The party shall execute a separate liquidated damage clause, right? So this is saying, hey, if buyer's going to occupy this, we can require the buyer to put more money into escrow that's going to count towards their deposit, which then, in effect, if we've got the liquidated damage clause in there, signed and initialed by all parties, that if the buyer's in breach of contract because they can't close, that would immediately go to the seller. Now, keep in mind that I would not allow buyer early occupancy if not all the contingencies have been removed. You're just opening yourself up for a problem there. All right, utilities section 3, there's also been some changes. Buyer agrees to pay for all utilities and services as well as for the following charges. Seller will pay for the following blank. If a bill for the time the buyer is in possession has been provided by the seller to escrow prior to the close of escrow, buyer shall deposit additional funds to be used to pay the expenses. Any expenses for utilities and services and the applicable charges for which buyer is responsible, which are not paid through escrow, shall be handled outside of escrow between the buyer and seller. Now, keep in mind, if we're going to do this through escrow, the lender needs to be aware of it, number 1. Number 2, if we submit a bill, the seller submits a bill at the last minute to be paid by the buyer, the lender's probably going to have to do a redisclose thing, and it could delay the close of escrow even further. So just kind of keep that in mind. For any maintenance or alterations, states that the buyer's got to first obtain seller's prior written consent. There's no assignment or subletting to somebody else. So those are the changes to that form. It does tell you to make sure that you consult with a qualified California real estate attorney, and then by signing below, we agree to this form. So that's the buyer early occupancy agreement. So just like the seller in possession form or the RLAS, so SIP, we use up to 29 days, and then for 30 days or more, we use the RLAS. We have the same forms for our buyers, our buyer early occupancy addendum for 29 days or fewer. And if it goes over 30 days, it becomes the IOA, or the interim occupancy agreement. All right, moving right along. If I can get my mouse, I don't know why I'm locked in on this form. Okay. Go away, form. All right, there we go. I don't want to do that. Hold on. I'm trying to make it go away. All right. There we go. Let's see if we can get in there. Okay, perfect. Except now, okay, I don't know what's happened to my computer. Probably because I'm clicking. Let's try this. All right. I think I was clicking 2 buttons at once, but maybe not. All right, that was our, let's see here, our buyer early occupancy. So then we have our BIA. Let's see if it takes us there. There we go. Our buyer investigation advisory is the next one that had changes to it. Importance of property investigation unless otherwise specified in the agreement, right? That it's the duty of the buyers to do their investigation. A broker's inspection, so we're talking about our Avid inspection, is a limited visual inspection. And a broker is not qualified to conduct investigations listed below, nor will broker conduct investigations checked by buyer. For these reasons, you should conduct thorough investigations, inspections, tests, surveys, and other studies, inspections, and investigations of the property personally and with the appropriate professionals. See CAR Form SBSA, who should provide written reports of their inspections. That's your statewide buyer and seller advisory. So here it talks about the broker's obligations, what the buyer's obligations are. They've added in insurance contingencies down here under fire hazard and other because they updated the purchase agreement with that insurance contingency about a year ago. Here it's saying, hey, we're adding in utilities, sewer, and internet. Availability of gas, electric, water, sewer, garbage, internet, and other services. The provider and quality of services may vary by location. It's part of their investigation. They should do that. We'd hate for them to close on the property and realize that they can't get the bandwidth that they need for internet. The solar power system, they also added line M, the existence of a solar power system, whether it's owned, leased, financed, or otherwise subject to obligations such as a power purchase agreement or maintenance agreement, the condition of the costs associated with the system. Okay, so just know they added that in there. And then buyer signs and initials it. Now, keep in mind this buyer investigation advisory is usually attached to every residential purchase agreement. So it's automatically in there. It's something that the buyer signs and they've updated it. We should make sure that the buyer is reading that. All right. I think we're back on track now with my mouse working. Maybe not. I love technology. All right, then we have our buyer inspection elections or investigation elections is what they're calling it now. This form is intended for use between a buyer and a buyer's broker. Now, keep in mind, this form can be filled out through Glide. I really like it through Glide because it's going to send that email to your buyer. Your buyer's going to open it up. It's saying, hey, are you interested in any of these investigations? Okay, so I really like this form. Most agents don't use it. You should be using it. It says here they've added in, you have an affirmative duty to exercise reasonable care to protect yourself, including discovery of the legal, practical, and technical implications of disclosed facts and the investigation and verification of information and facts that you know or that are within your diligent attention and observation. Okay. Then it goes and talks about the investigations below, buyer rights and duties by seeking information about the legal, practical, and technical implications of disclosed facts and to investigate and verify information and facts that you know are within your diligent attention and observation. If the purchase agreement gives you the right to investigate the property, the best way is to protect yourself is to exercise that right. However, you must do so in accordance with the terms and time limits specified in the agreement. This is extremely important for you to read all written reports and disclosures provided by professionals and to discuss results of inspections with the professionals who conducted that inspection. Now, keep in mind that even if we remove our investigation contingency, the buyer still has the right to have inspections done on the property. That doesn't waive their rights. That's the buyer's informational access to the property. So the buyer can still have reports and disclosures and inspections done on the property. All right, here they just clarified the different types of inspections. Down here, there's 40 different ones that they might be interested in. Now, keep in mind, it says here the buyer may elect to change these elections during the buyer's investigation periods. If buyer does not investigate these items during the contractual investigation time, buyer may lose the right to investigate these items later. So just because they check a box doesn't mean it's required, but it's a good conversation starter to see here that I saw you checked here, here, and here. I wanted to show you the preliminary title report, right? Because sometimes they're like, well, we want let's see what's in here. Lot size, let's see, government requirements. They've changed easements and encroachments. Number 9, maybe they check that box. You can let them know that, see here on your preliminary title report, it lists all the easements and encroachments recorded against the property. Do you want to do any further investigation beyond that, right? So we can help provide clarity to them. or the fact that like a survey versus an appraisal versus boundaries, like what the difference is on those, right? So we can walk them through those. So that's your buyer's inspection election. I like to send this out through Glide. I like my buyers to fill it out because it makes sure that whatever I've recommended to them as investigations, this is their chance to say, hey, like I know you recommended those 5, but we want to have these other things investigated as well. That way I can make sure that my buyer is clearly heard and that they understand who they should be contacting to schedule those inspections, or I can help them find somebody. All right. So that's your BIE form. They made those changes to that one. Next up, we have our BIW, which goes right in line with that form. This is our buyer's inspection waiver. Okay, this is between me and my buyers. Talks about they just made a few changes to this. This form has been in existence for a while, but in the previous, it used to say, hey, waivers, we had the home inspection, wood destroying of pest, and then other. Okay, that was really all that was on there. And then it talks about additional inspections. So I usually recommend like 5 inspections to my buyer: a home inspection, pest inspection, roof inspection, HVAC, and sewer lateral. Now, if there's a pool, I might also recommend a pool inspection, right? So then I might add or change those depending on what's there. It might be a chimney inspection, right? So I'm going to make sure I recommend those to my buyer based on each property, but those 5 are kind of my go-to. So if they decide to have a home inspection, we don't initial A. If they decide to have wood destroying pest, we don't initial B. If they don't have it, they would initial it. And then I would recommend the following other items that I did, which was like sewer lateral, HVAC, and roof, right? I would fill those in there. And then I would have the buyer initial if there's any of those they did not decide to move forward with. Okay. Now, in the course of doing inspections, one of the inspectors may say, hey, they might have decided to have a general home inspection. The home inspector said, hey, you should absolutely have the HVAC inspected. And the buyer may decide not to do so. Okay. So anytime there's additional inspections recommended, we're going to fill those in down here on 4 waivers of additional investigations recommended by other reports. Buyer has received the following reports that recommend buyer obtain additional investigations: general home, wood destroying pest, other inspection reports. Okay, so we're not putting what the other investigation was. We're just putting who recommended that they had other inspections done. Broker recommends that buyer obtain these additional investigations. If you do not do so, you are acting against the advice of brokers, and then they would initial here. Okay. And, you may recommend, we may go in and say, hey, as part of this, I recommend that you go down to the city or county building office and look at permits, right, for this property. So you might put permits in there. I would say that's probably a solid one to put in there, like permits. And I want to even say permits and intended use. Go talk with the county planning office about to look at what permits have been pulled on the property and to make sure that you can move forward with this property for your intended use, because I've gotten into trouble with that one before. Anyways, there's your bonus information on this form, but you're just going to fill out this bottom section. They just added clarity to that. So that's your buyer inspection waiver. So I like the buyer inspection election and the buyer inspection waiver as part of all my transactions. In addition to that, I like to also have all my buyers sign the buyers for your protection, get a home warranty. That one that outlines the importance of a home warranty. All right, moving right along on to our next one, we have our CR form for the seller. So this is our seller contingency removal form. Just know here that they put in as part of the assumption, substitution of eligibility for a VA loan, CAR form AFA paragraph 3. Okay, so they just added that in there. If we go back and look at that AFA form, paragraph 3, that's our assumed financing addendum, paragraph 3, right? Seller is advised to carefully investigate the substitution of eligibility along with proper documentation, right? So this just says, hey, if the assumption is a VA loan, the seller is contingent upon seller being provided a release of liability and substitution of eligibility unless otherwise agreed to in writing. So keep that in mind. If it is a VA and the seller's not going to get that substitution of eligibility, how do they do that? If it's a VA buyer assuming a VA loan, they can substitute their eligibility. Or it could be release of liability. So that's just saying that's part of this form. So now they've added that onto our contingency removal form as one of the seller contingencies. So just kind of keep that in mind there. Okay. All right. Moving right along from there. That was our seller contingency removal form. We also have our FHDS, which is our fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum. Now, let's see here. Keep in mind that fire hardening disclosure, if the property is built on or after January 1st, 2010, paragraphs 2B and 2C do not have to be completed. So it just provided clarity on that. B added flying embers. Sellers is not obligated to explain or clarify their responses. 2 questions, 2B1 through 2B6, whether they answer them yes or no. Voluntary explanation or clarification is permitted but not required. So we can answer yes or no. We don't have to provide clarification. They gave us a line to do so if we wanted to. Okay, list of low-cost retrofits. The following is a list of low-cost retrofits developed and listed by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, and the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, the OES. More information on home hardening is available at readyforwildfire.org. A list of low-cost retrofits with dynamic links can be found at, and it gives the website there. Have you, seller, completed any of the following low-cost retrofits during the time that you have owned the property? If the retrofit was partially completed or only applied to a portion of the identified feature, or if similar work was performed, or if your response below needs clarification, provide the explanation clarification below. If you are unsure if the retrofit item was completed or satisfied the conditions specified, check no and provide explanation or clarification below. Roof was replaced with a Class A fire-rated roof. Spaces between roof covering and sheeting blocked with non-combustible materials. Installation of non-combustible gutter covers on gutters to prevent the accumulation of leaves and debris in the gutter. Covered chimney and stovepipe. Non-combustible, corrosion-resistant, metal mesh screen, spark arresters. A lot of them have those, by the way. Install ember and flame-resistant vents. Caulk and plug gaps greater than 1/4 inch around exposed rafters and blocking to prevent ember intrusion into the attic or other enclosed spaces. Inspect exterior siding for dry rot, gaps, cracks, and warping. Caulk or plug gaps greater than 1/8 of an inch in siding and replace any damaged boards, including those with dry rot. Include weather stripping to gaps greater than 1/8 inch between garage doors and door frames to prevent ember intrusion. The weather stripping must be compliant with UL Standard 10C. Replace windows with multi-pane windows that have at least 1 pane of tempered glass. Replace siding or deck using compliant, non-combustible, ignition-resistant, or other OSFM Wildland Urban Interface products. Cover openings to operable skylights with non-combustible metal mesh screens with openings in the screen not to exceed 1/8 of an inch. Install minimum 6-inch metal flashing applied vertically on the exterior wall at the deck to wall intersection to protect combustible siding materials. Okay, so lots of information there on that report. Final inspection report disclosure. The property was newly constructed or rebuilt following damage by fire, and the construction required a permit on or after January 1st, 2005. Seller has obtained the final inspection report addressing compliance with the home hardening fire with the home fire hardening recommendation building standards as described in Government Code 51182. Okay, so there they've just updated that form. Again, this is only required of residential properties. The property contains 1 to 4 units. Seller is required to complete a transfer disclosure or a mobile home transfer disclosure statement. Property is located in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. And improvements to the property were constructed before January 1st, 2010. So if any of those conditions is not met, seller does not have to answer the questions in paragraph 2B and 2C. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That's our fire hardening disclosure and addendum. All right, our next one is our FVAC. This is our FHA VA amendatory clause. This is a really good update that they made. It's kind of minor, but it gives us a number. So when we fill out our purchase agreement, we usually include this. If we have an FHA or VA buyer, we put in number 1 with our offer. And then if they've countered us on the price, or maybe the appraisal came in different and we're changing it, we would check that little box there under the beginning where it says, due to a modification in the price stated in the previous amendatory clause, this FHA VA amendatory clause reflects the current purchase price and supersedes any previous amendatory clause, right? It has to get updated with the actual purchase price. For the lender, they require that. So this just gives us the ability to be able to do that and keep track of which one this is. So good change there on our FVAC form. Let's see, our next one is our modification of terms for the listing agreement. I was having problems getting this one. Oh, I know why now. All right, hold on. You know what? We're just going to close this and try again. Hold on just a second. There we go. It was opening it in a tab format on another form. So let's do this. There we go. Our modification of terms for the listing agreement. Just keep in mind that it just says, hey, that if the listing agreement is an exclusive agreement regarding residential property improved with 1 to 4 units, the renewal may not last longer than 12 months from the date of this modification. Okay, so if our listing agreement expires in a month, but we're doing the modification to extend that now, it's not 12 months from the date of the original expiration. It's 12 dates from the date of this modification. So they just updated that. Super simple change there to that modification of terms for the listing agreement. Remember, anytime we make changes to a listing agreement, we're going to use this modification of terms form. All right, our next one is our, oops, we skipped one. That's all right, though. This is our probate advisory. They just made some changes to this. So if there's any properties being sold under probate, the owner has passed away, just know that they've changed the verbiage and added that they changed the layout of this form as well, saying that, hey, they're exempt from providing the earthquake guide. They're the smoke alarm written statement of compliance. The sale is exempt for the state requirements for that. The written statement of compliance, they don't have to give you the smoke detector water heater statement of compliance, at least when it applies to the smoke alarms. The exempt seller disclosure, even exempt sellers have statutory, right? They don't have to do the regular TDS or SBQ, but they do have to do the exempt seller disclosure, or they should. It says they're strongly encouraged to do so. Known material facts, they're still required to do that. Here they just changed the layout of it. Smoke alarms, the sale is not exempt from the state requirements that for residential 1 to 4 units, operable smoke alarms be in place. It's negotiable who pays for those. So even though they don't have to provide a written statement for the smoke alarms, they do have to still make sure that there are smoke alarms. So you need to negotiate who's going to do that and who's going to pay for that. That is in the residential purchase agreement. And water heaters, the sale is not exempt from the state requirement that the water heaters be properly anchored or braced or strapped. Seller may use the water heater statement of compliance to do that. Those are the changes there to that form. I think, oh, and then down here, broker inspection, the sale is not exempt from the AVID inspection, and the sale is not exempt from the obligation to provide agency relationship disclosure and confirmation form. So it's just clarifying those informations for the probate. So anytime we have a probate sale, we use the regular purchase agreement, and then we use the probate advisory in conjunction with that purchase agreement. Let's see here. Oop. Then we have our notice of broker involved properties. They just made here that they have the notice of broker involved properties is provided to you as required by the written buyer representation agreement dated blank between. So they added the date there for the notice of broker involved properties. Okay, super simple change. Most of the changes they made this June were pretty easy. They weren't like over the top. Oh, I just went over this one. Hold on. Goodbye. We have our PRBS, which is our possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. They made quite a few changes to this form. Look at all that red. Okay. So let's see, broker agency relationship with multiple principals. A real estate brokerage, whether a corporation, partnership, or sole proprietorship, may legally represent more than one buyer or seller. This multiple representation can occur through sole proprietorship brokerage or through a salesperson or broker acting under the brokerage's license. So that would be associate licensee. So, right, so it could be multiple licensees working with people. Associate licensees under a brokerage's license may be working out of the same or different office locations and may or may not know one another, which is still dual agency, right? Clients of the brokerage may have similar goals and may compete against each other for the same property or the same pool of prospective buyers. Some buyers and sellers may prefer to work with individual sole proprietor brokerages, some with brokerages that have multiple licensees, and others with large brokerage companies that have multiple offices and may have regional, statewide, or national or international presence. Each has its own advantages. It is important for buyers and sellers to understand how the brokerage representation of multiple buyers and sellers may impact them under various situations. Multiple buyers, brokerage, right? May work with many prospective buyers at the same time. These prospective buyers may have an interest in or make offers on the same properties. Some of these properties may be listed by the brokerage. Whether the brokerage is large, small, it is possible that one associate licensee, agent 1, working with a buyer may not be aware that another associate licensee, agent 2, is working with a different buyer who is interested in viewing or making offers on the same property as agent 1's clients, and vice versa. Brokerage will not limit or restrict any buyer from making an offer on any specific property, whether or not the brokerage represents other buyers' interest in the same property. Multiple sellers. Brokerage, individually or through its licensees, may have listings of many properties at the same time. As a result, brokerage will attempt to find buyers for each of the listed properties. Some listed properties may appeal to the same prospective buyers. Some properties may attract more prospective buyers than others. Some of these prospective buyers may be represented by the brokerage, and some may not. Brokerage will market all listed properties to all prospective buyers, whether or not the brokerage has listed properties that may appeal to the same prospective buyers. Dual agency in a transaction. California law allows the brokerage to represent both a buyer and seller in a transaction. Brokerage dual agency, if one associate licensee from the brokerage is working with a buyer and another associate licensee from the same brokerage is working with a seller on the same transaction, that brokerage is considered dual agent with fiduciary duties to both buyer and seller. In that situation, each individual associate licensee working on the transaction is also considered a dual agent, having the same knowledge and responsibility as the brokerage. Single agent dual agency, another form. I like that they clarified this. I think this is really good because it was never clarified previous. Another form of dual agency occurs when an individual associate licensee is working with both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. In that situation, both the brokerage company and the individual licensee are dual agents with fiduciary duties to each side of the transaction. There is no one approach to this situation. Some brokerages allow single agent, dual agent to continue to represent both parties, as that associate licensee is the chosen agent of the principal. Some brokerages recommend that the broker or office manager get involved if there is a dispute between the buyer and seller. Some brokerages will require that the broker or office manager assist the licensee with one principal or the other, even if the parties do not have a dispute. Whether one of these approaches or another is taken in a single agent dual agency will depend on the circumstances of the brokerage policy. Regardless of the approach, the associate licensee and brokerage shall conduct activity consistent with the terms of paragraph 2C. Here's the acknowledgement and consent. Offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advise that seller or listing agent may disclose existence terms or condition of buyer's offer or other interested parties and agents unless all parties and their agents have signed a written confidentiality agreement. Please get that signed before you submit the offer if you're going to use one of those. In the absence of a signed NDA, buyer consents to such disclosure. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors such as current market conditions, prevailing practice in the real estate community, the listing agent's marketing strategy, and the instructions of the sellers. All right, multiple buyers or sellers, that just stays the same. They just changed some of the verbiage in there. Dual agency in the transaction. In the event of dual agency, seller and buyer agree that a dual agent may not, without the express permission of respective party, disclose to the other party confidential information, including but not limited to facts relating to either the buyer or seller's financial position, motivations, bargaining positions, or other personal information that may impact the price, including the seller's willingness to accept a price less than the listing price or the buyer's willingness to pay a price greater than the price offered, and except as set forth above. A dual agent is obligated to disclose known facts materially affecting the value, desirability of the property to both parties. Seller and buyer should discuss with the dual agent the details and parameters of this requirement. Seller and or buyer consents to allowing the brokerage to act as dual agent in the transaction. This form is attached to our purchase agreement. It's part of the residential purchase agreement, but they did make those changes to further clarify what that means as far as dual agency. So some good clarification there, in my opinion. Moving right along to our next form. Again, if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your little Zoomy hand, unmute yourself, just interrupt me or throw it in that chat box. We've got our RFA form, which is our referral fee agreement. This is what we use between us and another agent if we're referring an agent. Like I've got a client that's getting ready to do a purchase in Reno, Nevada. So I located an agent in Reno, Nevada, and I will send them over our referral fee agreement so that I get a piece of that commission for referring it to them. This is clarifying who, right, is going on. So this is the broker getting paid for referring client. Okay, that's the referring broker. Representing broker is the broker paying a fee to representing principal. Okay, so they added some clarification there. Here's our agreement referral fee in consideration for the referral of principal from referring broker. Representing broker agrees to pay referring broker blank percentage of the compensation earned by representing broker based only on the principal side of the transaction. This is a good clarification because if they do a dual agency on that, this is saying, hey, it's only on whoever was actually referred to you, not the dual agency. It could be a straight fee as well. Such compensation is owed if principal enters into or already has entered into a contract to buy, sell, or lease properties or transactions covered only for the first property transaction in paragraph B during the term of this agreement. I appreciate that because I actually had an agent come back to me and demand that I pay a referral fee for a repeating transaction. So I'm glad that there's clarity there. For the following properties, for any and all property transactions specified in 1B during the term of this agreement would be C. Okay, so A, the default here is only the first transaction specified in 1B. Okay, and two, or you could check C for any and all during the entire term of this agreement. So if they do multiple purchases, or if they're doing like a sale and a purchase forward. Referral period compensation payable if the event checked in paragraph 1B occurs no later than 12 full months from the date of this agreement. Timing of compensation, it's paid upon recordation of deed or evidence of transfer resulting from the event specified. Other terms, and then everybody signs it there. So those are the changes to the referral form. Let's see here. We have our RFR. I think this is the same. Oh, that's just the nope. Sorry. We're going to open that one up. Maybe. It's checking. It's thinking. All right. This is our receipt for reports. I almost skipped over this one because it's very similar. This is RFR. The other one was RFA, I think. So this is our receipt for reports. So if the buyer, if we're going to make an offer on a property that the seller already has reports, we fill out this form. I also do this form for all of my buyer ordered reports as well, so that instead of having my buyer sign off like the first page of every report, I fill them all out on here before the transaction closes, usually within the investigation period. Reports provided to buyer. Buyers being provided with the reports, documents, inspection reports, disclosures, proposals, estimates, or invoices checked in paragraph 4 and 5. Okay. We've got wood destroying pest, right? We've got all these things, and it says, hey, who ordered it? Was it the buyer or the seller? Who prepared that, and what's it dated? And did we send it via link? So they added this ordered by, and then they added via link, which means that we sent them a link, not the actual report. Okay, so that would be things like maybe our CC&Rs, our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Oftentimes those are a link in our preliminary title report, so we might click that box for link, or we might print those out and put them in. I like to put them in a home light disclosure file. That doesn't sound right, but anyways, there we go. And it's got some extra lines here that you can fill out. Here's a list of reports from the previous transaction. So here's like pre-sale inspections or buyer ordered inspections go up here in the first section. Down here in section 5, this would be like if the property was previously in contract and anybody but the seller ordered investigations. So the other buyer ordered investigations that are now part of that property, those get listed on this bottom section. So only if they're ordered by our buyer or the seller do they go in the top section. Everything else goes in the bottom section. I like to fill this out for my buyers. If I've got the seller and we did pre-sale inspections, I fill out the top part. If we were in contract and we fell back out and we got some reports from there, I fill them out down here. So that way I know that the buyer has seen all the reports and inspections that could be considered material disclosures regarding this property. Okay, so there is the changes to the receipt for reports form. Again, not a new form. A lot of people don't use it though. All right, we've got our RLA, that's our residential listing agreement. There were some changes made here to this form. We're just gonna scroll on down. They added the short sale listing addendum. They changed, it used to be short sale listing addendum and advisory or something like that. It had a different name to it, so they've updated that name. I think there used to also be 2 forms. They changed one into one instead. Here's our concessions specified in the MLS must be allowed to be used for permissible buyer expense or cost and may not specify concessions are to be used for broker compensation. However, term in the buyer's offer may specify the seller agrees to pay compensation to a buyer's broker. Seller should agree to do so. Broker does not represent, nor will broker confirm that the amount specified is owed by buyer to buyer's broker pursuant to a written agreement. So it's just saying that, hey, we don't have to verify it on the BRBC anymore if it's our listing. We're just going with that they're being honest and open that they already have that in place. In the absence of a separate agreement, seller's contractual obligation to pay buyer's broker is independent of any obligation between the buyer and the buyer's broker. So I just added some clarity there to that as we're trying to flush out what this all looks like post-settlement. Seller acknowledges that they've have a copy of this. They updated this line for signatures in most of the forms. So super simple changes there to our listing agreement. Nothing earth-shattering, nothing that's going to stop your business. So easy ones there. Then we have our RPA, which is our residential purchase agreement. So they made some changes there. Keep in mind that there were other forms that were changed in result of the listing agreement or the purchase agreement. I'm not going to cover all those, but they added clarity pertaining to the items here. So seller agrees to pay buyer's broker out of the transaction proceeds. They just added clarity there to that line. Super simple. That's where we negotiate the compensation with the seller. Then we have our probate advisory here, other form here that might be included with the purchase agreement. I think those are the only changes. I'm going to keep scrolling though. Oh, here, your home fire has hardening disclosure, just saying that was updated. A list of, that they've added the list of possible low cost fire hardening retrofits, identifying which ones the seller has completed. Broker compensation, the amount of compensation, if a percentage will be based on the final purchase price. Buyers advise that buyer's broker should not receive compensation from any source in excess of the amount on the buyer representation agreement. Let's see here. Broker compensation payment, including if applicable paragraph 3G3 of this agreement, it's deposited by the escrow holder. Buyer's obligation to pay buyer's broker shall be offset by any amounts the seller pays buyer's broker. Just adding clarity there. So super simple. And that's the end of those changes. So super simple changes to the purchase agreement. Again, nothing major. We've had such big purchase agreement changes over the last couple of years. It's nice to have one change where we don't have a big change. Let's see. This one is our rental property owner advisory. This is a new form that's just come out. I highly recommend that you utilize this form. with your buyers when they're purchasing property for the intent to rent out the property. Just talking about the different things that you may want to consider, including limitations on ability to set rental rates and evict tenants based on local rent and eviction control laws, the State of California Tenant Protection Act, habitability and upkeep, right? That you've got to stay on top of the condition of the property. Here's disclosures that are required as part of being a landlord, security deposits, maximum amount, how to return it to the tenant, pictures of property, screening fees. Okay, they've updated this. This actually isn't a new form. This is an existing form, I believe, that they just did updates to. Don't ask me why they're blue, though. Tenant rental payment reporting, assistance animals and pets. So this just kind of goes over. So if you've got somebody thinking about getting into being a landlord for the first time ever, great form to provide them with. The elevated wood balconies and stairs that just is going to affect in January. Legal and tax consequences, termination of agency. So great form there. I recommend you go over that one in its entirety so that you're comfortable with it if you're working with investors. And that's the RPOA form, the Rental Property Owner Advisory, RPOA. All right, we're almost done, guys. I know it's 10 o'clock. We will wrap up these last 5 forms here pretty quickly. We've got the Seller's Advisory, minor change here. Just talking about contract terms and legal requirements. Sellers should agree. Oh, that's just this going over. It's the same verbiage that was changed in the broker compensation advisory that we saw in the residential purchase agreement. Just talking about that a buyer may request as part of the contract to sell the property that you pay for repairs to the property, buyer broker compensation, and other items. It's your decision whether or not to comply with those requests. It could affect your ability to sell the property at a specified price. Should seller agree to do so, broker does not represent, nor does broker confirm that the amount specified, right? So we're just going into that same verbiage there. So super simple there. That seller's advisory is part of our listing agreement. So it's automatically attached to the listing agreement there, that seller's advisory. Super small change. Then we have our SIPA form. This is our seller in possession advisory. So we have seller remaining in property after the close of escrow. So we have the SIP form, the seller in possession form, which outlines the details of that. But then we have our seller in possession advisory, which outlines, let's see here, gets signed by both the buyer and seller, and it just outlines all the legal ramifications that might happen with the seller remaining in possession after the close of escrow, including risk to buyer and seller, creating tenancy under California laws, damage, maintenance of property, seller remains longer than agreed. I've never had that happen, thank goodness, but it could happen. So it's important that we let the buyer know that that's a potential. Consideration and legal restrictions, negotiating the terms of seller in possession, timing issues, continued length, 29 days or less, 30 days or more, seller's early departure, right, that they don't get a refund, lender issues, security for damage, final verification of property conditions. So this is a really good form. We'll cover this probably in August. It's in entirety when we talk about our buyer forms, our seller forms. We may talk about it this month as well as part of buyer form. So I do recommend, this is a new one, that you do read this form and it should go out with any SIP form or your RLAS. So you're either your seller in possession after the close of escrow, which goes up to 29 days, or your RLAS, your residential lease after sale, which is 30 days plus. Okay, so this is your SIPA form, new form. Then we have our SSA form, 3 more. We've got our short sale addendum. I'm not going to read this whole thing. They've basically taken and combined 2 forms into one with this. So it used to be called something else. It may have been the short sale addendum, but they've kind of combined the short sale advisory with the short sale addendum. So it just explains what a short sale is, what the considerations are when making an offer on a property, what short sale approval is. Okay, outlines all of that. Time periods, buyer's deposit check, no assurance of lender approval, buyer, sellers, and seller cost, other offers. So read through this form as well. If we start seeing more short sales come on the market, we will cover all these forms in more detail. We're not seeing that many. I did one that closed, I don't know, about a year ago. I've seen one other short sale one come on the market, but they're not very many because most people that sell still have equity in their properties or they're really close. So just know that this form exists and needs to be included anytime you're making an offer on a short sale property, or if you're trying to explain to a buyer what a short sale is, great form to pull up to go over with them, this SSA form. Again, they've kind of combined two forms into one with this one and eliminated one. Then we have our SSLA. This is our short sale listing addendum. So we would use this with our listing agreement when it's a short sale. It used to be called something else. But so they've just done that there so that this is between us and the seller. So now there's one between the seller and the buyer, and then there's one between the seller and the agent. Okay, super simple there. And then our SVRA form, which is our last form we'll talk about today, which is our short-term vacation rental advisory. So again, this is a new form. If you've got a buyer that's thinking about making a purchase as a short-term vacation rental, that'd be like your VRBO, your Airbnb type properties. Great form to provide them with to make sure that they're aware of possible restrictions, all the different types of things that they might encounter here, investigations, legal compliance, broker responsibility. So this just makes them aware that, hey, here's what we have regarding this. You should look further into it. So this is that short-term vacation rental advisory. So they've introduced some really good forms and made some good changes. Nothing major, just things to add clarity. Any questions before we wrap up today? All right. As always, if you guys have questions or want to see these forms on your own, if you go to your CAR Forms library, so you go to car.org, you can search June 2025 forms updates. It'll take you to that page. You can get the red letter editions just like I have. You can get the summary link, which is here. We'll open that up for you, which goes through what forms were added and changed and what changes were made, like buyer's affidavit. It was just RVW only. So, right, conforming to RPA changes. So it tells you what changes were made, what forms were added, new form amendment prior to disclosure to be used to make changes to TDS or SPQ. So great resource there. This is in your CAR Forms, or not CAR Forms, but your car.org website. Again, just go up to the search bar, type in forms updates or June 2025 forms updates. It should take you there really simply. And again, we're going to cover some more buyer forms the remainder of this month. Every Thursday, we'll be meeting at 9 a.m. to go over these buyer forms. So we'll be going through the RPA, looking at what forms are attached to that residential purchase agreement, making sure you guys are comfortable. If you have questions about specific forms that are buyer related, bring them with you next Thursday because I can dive into those as well. So we'll see you next Thursday at 9 a.m. The same link, going over buyer related forms with relation to that residential purchase agreement. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining me.